This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 786 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by FanDuel. Thanks for tuning in. Each August, I do an episode on the players I'm targeting in fantasy drafts, and then the players that I'm avoiding. I changed it up a bit last year, though. I brought on a couple of guests, and this year, I'm going to do the exact same thing. You're going to hear from me on this episode and some players that I'm targeting this year. But you're also going to hear from my good friend Rich Hribar. Rich is a fantasy analyst for Sharp Football Analysis, and he's one of the best prognosticators in the game. He's the one who let everyone know about the importance of quarterback rushing back in 2013 when he wrote his famous Konami Code article. And he's done a brilliant job with his worksheets for years. Rich and I came prepared with 5 players that you should target in drafts this season, and I think that you'll enjoy the back and forth. Now, before getting into that conversation, I just want to send another reminder to check out the Late Round Draft Guide. It's packed full of strategy-related information to help you crush your drafts. That strategy stuff can really help you increase your chances on hitting this year's biggest values. The guide is updated weekly, so you're getting up-to-date players to target, avoid, and my top 200 cheat sheet. You can check it all out on lateround.com. Now here's our top players to target here in 2023. All right, Rich, we did a show like this last year, similar. We're just going to go back and forth. We're going to talk about the guys that we want to target this season, that we're looking to target, the guys that we think the market is sort of undervaluing. You know, I don't want to say that you target these guys no matter what. In a similar breath, I don't want to say the opposite either, that when you're fading a player, you fade that player no matter what. It's really based on the market. It's based on the way that your draft is going. But for today's show, Rich and I both have 5 players that we're looking to target, generally speaking, that we've probably been drafting a lot this offseason. There's a lot of overlap here. If any of you are late round draft guide purchasers and readers, Rich definitely has, a similar process as I do with a lot of this stuff. So there's going to be some natural overlap, but it's good when multiple analysts who are looking at this stuff tend to agree on a player. That means that you might want to be even more confident in that player. So without further ado, Rich Hribar, give me your first player.
So I have 4 players that I'm legitimately just outright excited about and targeting, and I've got one guy that I'm taking based on I just think the field is too low on. So I'll start with that one guy so people can just say, all right, if that's just an ADP pick, whatever, I'm going to ignore him. But that guy is Brandon Cooks. I look at Brandon Cooks' ADP, and I just scratch my head, right? I'm just looking at him right now at wide receiver 42 right now, after guys like Quentin Johnson and George Pickens and Gabe Davis and Michael Pittman, the Tampa Bay wide receivers. And I'm just like, what is happening right now? So Brandon Cooks is literally a guy that's been a wide receiver 2 or better in 7 of his 9 seasons in the NFL. Anytime he's played with functional quarterback play, he's been an absolute really good fantasy player, which he is now going to this Dallas offense. I've had like the opposite take of a lot of people on the Cowboys. I actually think they're going to throw the ball more than people think they are, just because I believe from a top-down stance, they're built to throw the football. Like when you look at their roster, they're meant to play like 11 personnel and in space. Like the one drawback is if their defense is just incredible and like they have like an Eagles situation where they're just so far ahead in the second half of games, like they don't really put the ball in the air. But I mean, right now, I would rather have Brandon Cooks over literally all those guys. I just named a handful of other guys in that area too. But that's like my one, just like strictly like this guy's way too low play.
I'm going to go with a player here who is not so much that play, someone who you're just kind of seeing where his ADP is. And you're saying, yeah, he's going to outperform that ADP. This is someone who I think I'm probably going to live and die by to some degree with some listeners this year, because a lot of people like to latch on to one take and just ride or die by that one take from an analyst. It's Rachaad White. White right now, I think, is just unbelievably undervalued, within the market. I think at a baseline, we should feel good about Rachaad White, the receiver, right? He comes out of college, really good receiving profile out of school. He was someone who my model comped really, really favorably to David Johnson, which ironically, Bruce Arians drafts David Johnson. Bruce Arians in this front office now, he, obviously had some role or maybe played some role in drafting Rachaad White. Everyone will point to White's mediocre rushing last year and, obviously comp that the lack of efficiency on the ground to, what Leonard Fournette did. And they were both pretty bad. But I actually see that as maybe there's a team situation thing, right? We knew the offensive line was bad going into the season, and it played really poorly. The line was putrid, and he was a rookie running back too. But I also don't want to be like anchored by those types of numbers, because we know that they matter to some degree, but they're not nearly as predictive as just volume numbers, and just guys, if you look at the rest of the players' depth chart and looking at that and feeling good about the talent versus the other talent on that team. And right now, Rachaad White versus what the Buccaneers have, I think we can pretty confidently say he's the most talented running back that roster has. So, I think that if you look at last season, the bottom line is that in a split backfield, he still saw almost an 8% target share in that offense. And in the lone game that Leonard Fournette ended up missing, Rachaad White had 21.4% target share and almost 20 PPR points per game in that single game without Leonard Fournette. So I think that we would probably agree that Rachaad White is looking like he's going to see at least a double-digit percentage target share this year, that he's more than likely going to see a 10% target share. So now I look at the market-related trends. Right now, Rachaad White's sort of in that low-end RB2, maybe high-end RB3 bucket. If you look historically, I wrote about this in my draft guide. We've had 70 running backs drafted between RB18 and RB24 who ended up playing 8 games since 2011. Of those 70, 17 of them ended up hitting a 10% target share. So 53 of them were not pass catchers, whereas 17 of them were. Of those 17, 13 of them ended up exceeding ADP expectations. That's literally just looking at how many points we'd expect a player to score at a certain ADP. 9 of those 17, so more than half of them, outperform that ADP expectation by 3 or more PPR points per game, or what I consider a moderate breakout. So typically moderate breakouts will hit at about a 25% rate. This is this is more than double that when you're looking at this subset of low-end RB2s with a 10% target share. And that's really the only filters that you're looking at here. Obviously there's concern that Tom Brady's gone. Totally understand that. I think that the concern with Brady being gone is not so much that the offense is going to be so much worse than it was last year, because the offense was really, really bad last year. They had 31 total touchdowns. You could easily argue that the offense this year could score more touchdowns than it did last year. Like it can still happen. Like that's not out of the range of outcomes here and not a possibility. But the thing that I think people get wrong is that they assume that Tom Brady was peppering the running back position through the air at this really, really high rate. Really wasn't that. They ranked 15th in the league last year in running back target share. It's just they threw the ball a lot, right? They just had a lot of raw volume. But what that did was, on those 31 overall total touchdowns, 26 of them were passing touchdowns. Only 5 of them were rushing touchdowns last year. So we should see some regression there, which will help a player like Rachaad White. So I look at the landscape right now, Rich. I look at the running backs going around where Rachaad White's going 2 rounds before Rachaad White in a lot of cases. And I ask myself, why are those players any different than Rachaad White? Are you going to say that it's offensive situation based? Okay, Miles Sanders, Cam Akers, you're really going to make that strong of an argument that their situations are that much better than Rachaad White's? Maybe James Conner. Okay, I understand that. But, it's basically the same situation where they're both workhorse backs or projected workhorse backs. And a lot of the stuff that I've studied shows that you want to embrace the uncertainty with these younger players in the middle rounds, as opposed to getting the 6th-year guy like a James Conner, who's maybe going to exceed expectation by a little bit. Rachaad White at least has that chance to really break out and become, a really good player in the league.
Yeah, I love Rachaad White's draft position. Hopefully this show doesn't ruin that, especially people listening to you and in your audience. We've talked about him a little bit behind the curtains. I said I outright, even if ADP was equal, I would rather have Rachaad White than Najee Harris, which may be a hot take to some people. But I would bet that the Buccaneers are a great sound bet to score more touchdowns they did last year. They kind of bottomed out last year. They were 8 touchdowns below expectation for me last year. Since 2010, there have been 18 other teams in that same group or below the Buccaneers. And there are 3 other teams, the Steelers, the Jets, and Broncos, that are also in that bucket coming into this year. 17 of those 18 teams scored more touchdowns the following season than the year prior, with an average increase of 8 touchdowns. I also have a free article on the site, too, this week that is actually looking at kind of the stats that matter for each position. And the running back one is open to everyone this week. And it literally shows like how we want to chase volume firsthand. And like the numbers are like very stark, and how efficiency is not stable for running backs. Again, that plays into here. You look at the 2 games where Rachaad White played over 60% of the snaps. He had over 100 yards from scrimmage in both games last year.
Yeah.
Are they the sexiest yards? Absolutely not. But it doesn't matter, right? Like when you're getting that much volume, it's going to play out. We want to chase that opportunity. So, I mean, I'm in lockstep with you on just saying like, yeah, I get it. It's kind of a top-down situation where you kind of try to talk yourself out of the Buccaneers guys. But I mean, I think there's going to be some dead cat bounce in that offense. And if we're just making volume plays, we want to bet on guys that are, young year two running backs, year three running backs, rookie contract running backs that can catch the football. He just checks off all those boxes.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, Rich, give me another player from your list.
Yeah, so this is a guy, I mean, I found from drafting since, February, how am I going to attack the tight end position this year? It's something we workshop every year, right? Like is it going to be an early round tight end year? Are we going to try to just get Travis Kelce at all costs? Are we going to try to do some things differently this year? And I have found that bar none, all of my tight end strategies revolve around one player, and it's Pat Freiermuth. I think the wide receiver meta this season with the way wide receivers have pushed up make it harder than ever to go with Kelce. Although you're not going to bottom out with Kelce without an injury. But also when you look at Kelce, he historically had hit the highest positional leverage any tight end in NFL history has had, even by far the most he's had over his career. So the field's going to be better. Then some of the things we just talked about on a team level, like the Steelers are due for all this offensive regression to the mean by a lot of analysis I've done. They were 31st in scoring plays that were actual touchdowns. 55% of their scoring plays last year were field goals. Since 2010, 79% of those teams score more touchdowns the following season, with an average increase of 11.17 touchdowns the following year. They were 31st in converting their yardage into touchdowns. They fit in that same bucket we just talked about with Rachaad White. Historically, those teams come back and they score an average of 10.2 touchdowns per game the next season, teams that are below the base rate. So how do you play this, right? I already don't kind of hinted I don't love Najee and his ADP. I think Deontay Johnson's fine. He's definitely going to score a touchdown this year. I think he's appropriately fine. But I think the most mispriced guy, and if we're betting on the touchdown production, right, the passing game, I still see that the touchdowns going to a guy like Pat Freiermuth, and he plays the right position and the right cost. You look at his second season, everything spiked for him. His yards per catch, his yards per target rose. In a year where Kenny Pickett, played with a rookie quarterback, and you and I have done a lot of rookie quarterback analysis, and typically you do not see tight ends play well with rookie quarterbacks, despite the narrative that a rookie is going to lead on his tight end, which isn't true. And then you look at as a target earner, He established himself. He was 7th among all tight ends in target per out run. He was 7th in yards per out run. But when Freiermuth was actually on the field, because he had a concussion, he had a knee injury, he dealt with some ankle stuff. When he was on the field with Kenny Pickett, he had a 25% team target share tied with Deontay Johnson. He led the team in yards per route run. I look at him. I actually see him pretty much in a similar tier as Dallas Goedert and kind of George Kittle. And he's way below those guys. He's even below guys like Evan Ingram and David Njoku. So, I mean, bar none, he's been my favorite tight end to draft this season.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask you if if you're in a draft, you're in a big money draft, or you're in a really important draft of yours where you have to draft with more conviction and not necessarily just from a portfolio standpoint. Are you staring at, let's say George Kittle falls a little bit, and Pat, he's in the Pat Freiermuth range or something, would you still draft a Freiermuth over Kittle, or are you cool with going Kittle in that scenario?
I don't want to use the cop out of like, well, what is like available to me still at the other positions, and what does my team look like? Because obviously, you've done a lot of onesie, research too. And like, if I'm still chasing wide receivers, or my league format is geared towards wide receivers, especially like I said, with this current wide receiver meta this season, it still would be hard for me to say like, wow, I can just still wait three to four more rounds and get Pat Freiermuth. Like, the thing about Freiermuth is I feel comfortable reaching on him at ADP and still getting a discount on him.
Yeah. Okay. I got you. Yeah. It's one of those scenarios where, you don't need to necessarily force the issue, because we know the tight end position is the tight end position and the value the tight end position brings. But from just a straight up value perspective, Freiermuth is that dude for you.
Yeah, I think if it's full point PPR, especially, I like kind of Freiermuth kind of more too. Because I think he's just going to have a nice bed of receptions, where Kittle's going to be like more of that spike week player.
Yeah, totally. All right, next on my list, I kind of have a twofer, but I'm going to focus more on one of the two. It's the Detroit backfield. It's both David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. I actually think, there are some drafts and some platforms where Gibbs' ADP is where I have it. If not, I mean, I've been in drafts. I was in a pros versus Joe's draft where Gibbs ended up going in the mid second round, like before a lot of the some of the workhorse backs were drafted. And so I'm not that high on Gibbs. I'm certainly high on Gibbs though versus the market versus what Fantasy Pros analysts and expert consensus rankings, what that's saying. Market trends have dictated that dead zone running backs, if you want to beat the dead zone, rookie running backs are the way to go. If you look at history, the rookie running backs in the dead zone, they typically perform more like late second round picks in redraft leagues as opposed to like the fourth, fifth rounders, they're being drafted as. So I'm going to say Jahmyr Gibbs is a good pick this year. You should draft Jahmyr Gibbs. With that being said, I want to focus on David Montgomery a little bit more here today because I think he also, interestingly enough, has a lot of favorable market related trends, in his favor, which we don't see very often. It's only like the third time, I think, since 2011 that we've seen a rookie in the dead zone with a veteran teammate in the middle rounds of redraft leagues by ADP. So that's kind of interesting. This is not a typical situation. Clearly with David Montgomery, we shouldn't be drafting him because Jamal Williams scored 17 touchdowns last year. Like that's not the approach that you should take in drafting a guy like this. What's really interesting with Jamal Williams is everyone just assumes that he exceeded touchdown expectations last year. It wasn't really that he exceeded touchdown expectation. It's that the Lions just put him in this situation so frequently that what's really going to regress is the fact that, he's not going to see 33 goal line attempts again next, whoever that player would be wouldn't see 33 goal line attempts year over year. How he converted was not that out of the ordinary or anything like that. It's just that he saw so much volume there. The Lions were second in the NFL in goal line rushes last year, 39. Jamal Williams had 33 of those 39, which is just not a ratio or just from a volume perspective, not something that you generally see. So I'm not expecting Montgomery, we shouldn't go in with a projection of like 15 touchdowns or anything like that. But I do think that he's going to see the goal line work in that offense, which is obviously a plus. It's an offense that, could see a decent amount of positive game scripts this season. They have a 9.5 win total, according to FanDuel Sportsbook. They play in a dome. We've seen a lot of good shootouts in this current line with this current Lions offense, and obviously that's good news for anyone in that offense. But I think the positive with David Montgomery, well, there's a couple, but I think one positive is that he's a much better pass catcher than Jamal Williams is. And I feel like that's sort of been pushed aside because we make this assumption that, Detroit got Jahmyr Gibbs. They're going to use Jahmyr Gibbs as receiver, which yes, they're going to, but they're going to use Jahmyr Gibbs as a receiver, not just out of the backfield. They're going to line him up across the line. They're going to do a lot of different stuff with him, which I don't buy into generally. Usually that's an overblown, topic, especially this time of year. But with a guy like Gibbs, who, he had prolific receiving production, was one of the best receiving backs that we've seen come out, the last decade. And so I think that there's a lot of reason to believe that they're going to use him not just out of the backfield. And if you look at what Detroit did last season, they were actually 13th in the NFL in running back target share as a team. They were pretty average. And if you look at what happened after they traded TJ Hawkinson, that number was top 5 in the league. And that's where you start to see more consistency out of those running backs out of the backfield as receivers. So I think they can maintain that. I think there's a very real possibility, given the way this team's built, given what's going on outside of the running back position, that we could see them be a top 5, top 6 offense and running back target share this season. So that's fine for Gibbs, but that's also very good for David Montgomery, who, in 3 of his 4 seasons has been at a 12% plus target share per game rate. And then, of course, one of the reasons that the market related trends exist for David Montgomery is because middle round running backs who have dead zone teammates, they generally hit at a really good rate. And a lot of that, the way that I've explained that is that if a running back has a teammate being drafted in the 4th, 5th round, and then that running back is still getting drafted in the 7th, 8th round, that likely tells you that other running back, that RB2 on his team, there's something going for him. There's something favorable there. And what's not being priced into Montgomery's ADP, in my opinion, is what happens if Jahmyr Gibbs gets hurt. What happens if Jahmyr Gibbs is out? And I think that, if David Montgomery were to be entering this season without Jahmyr Gibbs in that backfield, he'd probably be drafted ahead of like a Najee Harris, ahead of like a Travis Etienne, like at least in that tier, in my opinion. And so you have to think of it in that way, where not only does his projection say this is where David Montgomery should be drafted, and he's being drafted there, but that projection assumes that Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be healthy. And if Jahmyr Gibbs is not healthy, then David Montgomery is a fringe RB1. Like he could at least have that potential, right? So I think there's just a lot going for him this season. He could still be a very rock solid RB2 even with Gibbs, but then he has that upside if something were to happen to Gibbs.
Yeah, I think when you look at Dave Montgomery, he just fits a lot of team structure builds where he could be like a flex pinch, maybe as like a floor. Then the contingency value obviously is massive in this offense. I think when you look at the Lions, I mean, it's just like every offense, right? Like the offense is always going to go through the best players, given that whether it be a week level or a season level. And when you look at the way the Lions are built, like the running backs are going to be carrying a lot of this offense. After Amon-Ra St. Brown, there's a lot of questions at wide receiver. We obviously know we won't have Jameson Williams at least the opening 6 weeks. And you've got guys that have just basically been like ancillary guys over their NFL careers. Josh Reynolds, where Marvin Jones is at his point of his career, Khalif Raymond. We don't know what we're going to get out of rookie tight end Sam Laporta. I love Sam Laporta, but what are we going to get out of him? So like this offense is going to be very running back centric again by default because their best players on offense are running backs again. So they're going to get a huge workload. Gibbs is a guy I don't draft a ton at ADP, but there's absolute FOMO for like involved, for not getting him because like his ceiling, his apex outcome is massive. Like, right. Like I haven't projected to have the third most receptions at running back sharing time. Like what if the contingency goes inverse, right? Like what if David Montgomery got injured and now Gibbs is getting goal line carries and he's, catching even more passes. Yeah. But so I mean, the Lions offense as a whole, is just really easy to bet on. Once again, having to funnel touches through these running backs.
For sure. All right, Rich, let's hear your third.
My third guy is James Cook, who's getting a little bit of steam now, but James Cook obviously his median projection is nowhere near like where Gibbs is, and he plays a mobile quarterback. But from a player archetype stance, like they're very similar players. They're players that are hyper efficient in the passing game, have questions like how much early down like ceiling are we going to get? Are they going to get goal line carries? Very cheap, but they're in great offenses, right? Like we know these offenses are going to score points. So while he doesn't favor as from a projection stance as good as a guy like Gibbs, there still is like in the highest range of outcomes. Like James Cook can compete with even a guy like Gibbs or even a guy like Aaron Jones, right? Like those guys that are priced up there in that fit that archetype. He only had 110 touches as a rookie, but he averaged 6.2 yards per touch. 27% of his carries resulted in a first down or touchdown. That was sixth among 66 running backs that had 50 more carries last year. He averaged 1.43 yards per out run. That was 16th among all running backs with 100 or more routes last season. He was targeted on 25% of his routes. That was 10th among the same group. And then also when you look at the types of targets he was getting, I mean, 78% of his targets were beyond the line of scrimmage, which is immensely high for a running back. It was 7th among that same group of guys we talked about. So he's not just getting like those tertiary dump offs like we saw like Ramondre Stevens last year, where you have to kind of question like were the targets just a byproduct of everyone being out, and these aren't like really good targets to really kind of chase anyways. We have seen that in like the Bills offense, if they do lean on one guy, that running back's really good. And it should be inherently known. Like you've got a really good offense. If one guy's getting all the backfield share in a really good offense, he's going to be good. Like Devin Singletary was for certain stretches. But what if there's an outcome where like Damian Harris actually is just kind of like a hanger on, right? What if they do reduce Josh Allen's rushing? Like those outcomes still exist for a guy that I think is right now where he's priced, James Cook, is a very miss small, hit big. Like I think you're looking at him where like you're drafting him as like an RB3 flex right now. And you have the upside to get potentially something a lot larger, even if it's say like for a pocket of the season, right? Like what if Damian Harris misses like a 4-week stretch? Like then you've got a guy that for you drafted as a flex, like being like a locked in RB1, like that's what Devin Singletary was. And we've got a much better player than Devin Singletary too.
Yeah.
So he's a guy, I just think he just fits so many builds, just where he's priced right now that I'm just keep glomming onto him almost every draft.
Yeah, he's someone who I was like at market with. And I even talked about it on a mailbag episode a couple of weeks ago where I was like, yeah, I'm at market with him. I'm a little bit worried about the goal line stuff, et cetera, et cetera. And then I started thinking about it a little bit more and I'm like, I shouldn't be making these types of like floor excuse. It doesn't matter. I should be looking more so just at what he's going to produce. He's probably going to be able to match ADP. And, you just mentioned a lot of the ceiling outcomes. So I've amended that take since then where not only have I just grown to like him where he's being drafted more, but the other piece to this with James Cook and why I think we might see him continue to rise a little bit is there's a lot of question marks going in that area of the draft. You have the Denver backfield where Javonte is now looking healthier than people expected. And so, that's sort of a tough thing to project. And so people, whenever there's uncertainty, people just push guys down a lot. Isaiah Pacheco is another one where, you have this Deneric Prince narrative going on right now, and you have him being banged up. And so, he's being pushed down a little bit. And so that just naturally allows a player like Cook, who looks evidently great in camp and is getting a ton of, as you mentioned, getting a ton of steam right now. That just pushes a guy like that up. But I do think that, like you mentioned, he's someone, especially like if you go like hero RB and he's your RB2, I think that's still fine. Like I think that's still totally okay. You're going to get some sort of floor each week, and then there are some outs for him to hit that ceiling. We do have some of the standard weight concerns that we have for prospects entering the league and how much volume are they really going to see. But in an offense like this, at least, similar to like a Devon A-Chain, where, in an offense like that, that they could see limited touches and still pay off and still be okay enough as a fantasy asset. So I really like that call out of James Cook. I'm going to pivot. I'll be very quick with this one. Let's go to the quarterback position. I'm going to go with Deshaun Watson. Obviously, Watson was miserable last year as a passer, but he also hadn't played football in like 2 years. So I think that we can at least give him a little bit of a break there from a football perspective. The last time that we saw him play a full NFL season, he averaged over 23 fantasy points per game. I mean, he was the standard Deshaun Watson who crushed fantasy football. 3.9 of those points per game came via rushing, which is a strong number at quarterback. But it was also because, obviously, I'm talking to the Swami of Konami here and Rich Hribar. He is someone who literally invented the Konami code. Well, for fantasy football, not the actual cheat code itself, but, for fantasy football, and letting everyone know back in 2013 on numberfire.com to draft, these guys like Tim Tebow, Terrell Pryor, etc., who have the upside with their legs. The thing that I love about Watson is that the thing that was the problem last year was his arm. It was not his legs. He was averaging essentially the same number of fantasy points per game on the ground as he did the last time we saw him play a full season, which tells you that at least the athleticism's still there. At least that upside is still there. And that's all we should be really caring about, in that low end QB1 range, which is where, he's generally being drafted this season. Then you add Elijah Moore to the mix, who I like a lot as a player, and just, being a good fantasy asset this year too. They're likely going to be more pass heavy this year. He's in a spot where you can still get him relatively late, and it's sort of the last player in that tier that you feel really comfortable with having a week in and week out starter who's going to have that top 3 upside in fantasy. And then you get into more question marks, into more pocket passers, all that good stuff. So I'm really into Deshaun Watson this year. He's probably going to end up being my highest rostered quarterback, across my leagues.
Yeah, when you look at Watson, and I think his ADP will relatively stay kind of where it's at, just because there's always going to be a contingency that just isn't going to draft him probably for the rest of his career at this point, because they just don't want to go down that lane. Obviously, we won't get into to that, but like talking about him as a player, it's just like, how much of a hall pass do you give him for everything last year? He comes back, basically misses 2 years, with the team for the first 11 weeks. They play like 2 cold weather games. They have offensive line issues at that point. The receiving core is not that good. Like, you kind of have to go back. I've brought this up a few times. Is like, you kind of have to go back to Dante Culpepper to find a guy that was as good as Deshaun Watson that just stopped being good again. And even Dante Culpepper had like a significant knee injury. He was older at the stages of the drop off than Watson is right now, because he's only going to be 28. And Randy Moss left. But it's just rare to have a guy that was as good as Deshaun Watson just stop being good at quarterback.
Right.
Like that's basically it. And then when you're talking about from the playing the fantasy game, we've talked about for years, like the drafters have gotten so much sharper at drafting the quarterback position than ever, because they understand what archetype of quarterback is going to smash for fantasy football. And when you're looking at guys beyond that firewall, Deshaun Watson is one of those last remaining guys of that archetype. So like, if you are going to swing and Deshaun Watson sucks, well, cool. You're just doing what like a few other teams in your league are doing. You're gonna be streaming and playing guys, like taking other bites at the apple. But he's definitely the type of guy, when you say like, am I going to take Deshaun Watson or like say like Russell Wilson or Geno Smith? I like Geno Smith a lot, but like, can Geno Smith like theoretically be like the QB3?
Right. Exactly.
Like probably not. Like, right. Like probably not. So like when you're talking about taking swings, like where you can set and forget a guy that has a high ceiling to compete with the Jalen Hurtses, to compete with the Patrick Mahomes, even where Justin Fields is going right now. Cause like, listen, 5 or 6 years ago, there's no way Justin Fields has the ADP that he has right now.
Exactly.
So he definitely fits that mold of like where if you're taking guys in that area of the draft where you got frozen out of that big pocket of guys, that he fits the archetype you swing at.
100%. All right, give me your number 4 player here.
Mine is in that archetype of players that you have to pay up for, and we'll see. As I start to do more, Gen Pop drafts, we do these drafts, coming into August for our actual leagues if his ADP holds, because he's gotten pushed up to QB4 now, and it's Lamar Jackson. But I do think that we're going to see an actual. I don't want to call it like a full reemergence, because I don't know if we've ever seen him like actually like play like in an offense that's going to be more Lamar Jackson centric. Obviously, he had the huge 2019 season, and I don't think that will probably always be his best fantasy season ever.
Yeah.
Like when we look at his career, but I do think when you look at all the changes structurally for the Ravens, and it's unfortunately they're doing this after giving him $260 million and not while he was on his rookie contract, but structurally all the changes they've made are swerving into this where the offense is going to now go not only through Lamar Jackson, but he's going to be an actual catalyst and not just thumbing over and glossing over like all the terrible decisions they've made on this roster that have been exposed the past 2 years. Because the interesting thing about Lamar Jackson is since his 2019 season, he actually hasn't been a real spike week player. In that 2019 season, he had 11 top 6 scoring weeks. He had 9 top 3 scoring weeks. In the 3 years since, and he has missed 11 games in those 3 years, he has combined for just 11 top 6 scoring weeks and 6 top 3 scoring weeks. So he hasn't even been the kind of player like probably people perceive him as. He's been actually more of like the old school Konami player where like you're getting like that baseline production, right? Like he's doing the rushing. But now you factor in, they add Todd Monken. And it's not just Todd Monken from an aggressive, like being a pass rate over expectation guy, like he has been his entire career. It's also a volume stance, like a play running stance, playing with more tempo, like that you've heard like spoken about the entire camp for the Ravens. And then it's you can easily still take the Ravens wide receivers from individual level and say, you know what, Rashad Bateman may never be healthy. Zay Flowers is a first round rookie. He played at a small school. He was an old producer. We got Odell Beckham coming off an ACL. He's 31. Who the hell is Nelson Aguilar right now? But when you put all those guys together as a sum of parts, as a unit, it is so much better than what the Ravens put on the field last year. They were dead last in the NFL in wide receiver targets, 31st in catches, last in receiving yards, 29th in touchdowns. The final 14 weeks of the NFL season last year, their wide receivers had 1 touchdown.
Crazy.
Like an absolute just in the year 2023 of NFL football. And then he still has Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, obviously, too, like 2 talented tight ends. So I think when you put all of this together, like I said, I don't necessarily want to label it as like a reemergence or like a breakout, but I do think that we're going to see an actual different version of Lamar Jackson than we actually have seen his entire career this year.
Yeah, look, so you mentioned that he's being drafted at QB4, and I have him ranked at QB4, but I still think he's a player to target. And the reason for that is, I think what we're going to see, we've seen it in industry drafts and in best ball drafts and such. There isn't that unreal of a gap, let's say, between the last of the big 3 quarterbacks and then where Lamar Jackson goes. But I do think, to your point, when, more casual drafters, the average fantasy football manager starts drafting here in August, we're going to see a bigger gap. And that's why he's someone that just seems like an obvious go-to, because there's a very, very real chance that he ends up just joining that group, or one of those guys gets bumped down this year, what have you. Because really, the stars are aligning for him. And a lot of people are worried that he's not going to run as much because the offense itself, Monken's come out and said that he doesn't necessarily want him to. But when you're throwing the ball more, when you're dropping back to pass more, that lends itself to a lot more scrambling and a lot more running that way too. So there's at least some upside still from that perspective. I'm going to move on. I'm going to go with a tight end. I think it's the first tight end that we've talked about. Maybe the only one that we're going to talk about.
I did the move.
Oh yeah, Freiermuth. That's right. I forgot about Freiermuth. You're right.
Oh man, just dunking on my pick already.
Yeah, I know. It's Pittsburgh guy.
What a yinzer.
Yeah.
You did yinzer. Put a yinzer on this guy, try to play the host. And
all right. So I'm going to go with, I like Freiermuth and all, but I'm going to go with my favorite late round tight end this season, and that's Greg Dulcich. My research has shown that you want to target 2nd and 3rd year tight ends late who had good previous season peripherals. Last season, Greg Dulcich as a rookie, he had a target share per game rate of 17.7%. He's now a year 2 guy. That 17.7% target share per game rate was second best among rookie tight ends with 8 or more games played since 2011, behind only Evan Ingram and Kyle Pitts. Obviously, 2 strong tight ends. I mean, I'm not saying that they're, Travis Kelce, but within the landscape of tight ends, that's good company to be part of. I have a tight end prospect model that's sort of in beta mode that I've been like teasing and throwing out there throughout the offseason, but it also has a year 2 model, that tight end model. And Greg Dulcich looks really good in that model. He's a 91st percentile guy there. The players who ranked higher than the 90th percentile since 2016, which is where the model dates back to, there's a list of names, so be prepared. Kyle Pitts, Evan Ingram, Noah Fant, Dallas Goedert, George Kittle, Mark Andrews, OJ Howard, TJ Hawkinson, Alberto, Hunter Henry, and David Njoku. So really, of that group, you have OJ Howard, Alberto as true busts from the group, and then maybe Noah Fant too to some degree. But overall, tight end is a complete dumpster fire. That's a good group within the context of the tight end position to be part of, to be associated with. Now you get this new offense with Sean Payton. Hopefully that brings more upside, more scoring. I think that he's going to see a fairly strong target share in this offense right now, especially, you have Tim Patrick going down where maybe they don't feel as confident going heavy 11 personnel just because you have Marvin Mims now as a more inexperienced guy. I'm not sold on Cortland Sutton being this stud wide receiver. I think Jerry Jeudy's very good, but what I'm getting to is there's a chance that Greg Dulcich is the number 2 option in the passing attack this year. And if that's the case, then seeing an 18, 19, maybe 20% target share could really, really go a long way. I think he's a pretty safe bet to outperform ADP.
Yeah, he's got great hair too. He looks like Indigo Montoya for Princess Bride. That's where he scores on my metric, my great hair tight end metric.
Yeah.
He's definitely number 1.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, in this week helped him out a lot too, right? Like obviously, it's a bummer about Tim Patrick. Obviously, a player that he has to grind his way to get like a huge NFL contract and cash in, and then he's basically his career's over since signing that contract. Then you have the KJ Hamler unfortunate news, and it just opens up like, are we going to count on Marvin Mims, a player we probably both like, but a rookie wide receiver? And then when you just talk about too, like the structure of this offense, like going from Sean Payton, like it's probably gonna, like Dulcich is gonna have to now heavily be a part of this. Makes them just a lot easier by on top of all the things that you kind of highlighted just from a player arc stance.
For sure.
And I think that, and also another player in his tier that was similar to him was Chig Okonkwo, ended up taking a step back a little bit with DeAndre Hopkins coming in, also helping him out.
Yeah, 100%. All right, Rich, you got one more guy. Let's hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to the top again. Typically when we talk about like player exposures, right? Like it's, typically your highest guys, like roster guys, are going to be like your favorite later round guys, right? Because they're available more frequently. The front round guys are typically dictated by where you're drafting from, right? Like when you're going to land guys. But I mean, my highest rostered player by far, and I hope I don't kibosh this dude, like is Tony Pollard, man. I can't think of an easier second round pick to make a click of the button than Tony Pollard, because I think he should be a first round pick in fantasy football. It reminds me of the Austin Eckler situation a couple years ago when the Chargers gave Eckler the contract. They let Melvin Gordon walk, and people were kind of just tried to talk themselves out of Austin Eckler when all they wanted for an Austin Eckler's entire career was to be like to have the opening that he was going to receive. And then when he got that opening, people were just kind of like, I don't know if he's going to score touchdowns. I was one of those guys, just trying to talk myself out.
That's what I was going to say. I was one of those people who was questioning Eckler seeing goal line work. I don't want to make that mistake again with Tony Pollard.
Yes. I mean, we've got just a hyper efficient electric per touch player. And this guy's bigger than Austin Eckler.
Yeah, right.
Like this,
right.
Like it's not like Tony Pollard is like some 100, like he's treated like a scat back, right? Yep. But like he's 210 pounds. Like he's got bigger size. He's more Alvin Kamara-ish.
Right.
And it feels like people are trying to talk themselves out of like reasons not to draft Tony Pollard, but he's had 13 career games with 15 or more touches. In those games, I know it's completely arbitrary threshold, but it's a nice round number. And, he's averaged 19.6 PPR points per game in those games, 112.6 yards from scrimmage, 13 touchdowns in those games. He's obviously played 3 career games out with Zeke Elliott out. He's had over 20 PPR points in all of those games. I don't know if Dallas, especially with just giving Trayvon Diggs a huge contract, like, are they really in the market for one of these running backs? They've been talking up Rico Dowdle and Malik Davis, but I mean, this is everything we asked for Tony Pollard in a year where running back looks as scarce as ever, right? Like people are trying to talk themselves out of one of the guys that very clearly looks like he can catch passes. He can score from anywhere on the field anytime he touches the ball. He plays in an elite offense. And like, we're trying to find reasons not to draft this guy. I can't think of any time I'm on the clock. And it doesn't matter what, if I have 201, 202 to 211, wherever the hell he goes. If any time he's there in the second round, I'm immediately clicking that button on Tony Pollard. I think he competes with Austin Eckler. The great thing is that you don't have to take him like anywhere near that ADP. But man, I hope I don't ruin him, because like, this is by far my favorite draft pick we've had in a couple of years.
Yeah, and the thing with Eckler too is that Eckler has a lot of change in his offense too. I mean, they have they have a new coordinator. They might not use him exactly how they've used him over the last couple of seasons. I still have Eckler ranked ahead, but I'm just saying that there's plenty of question marks. And I mean, there's question marks with Christian McCaffrey and the way they used Elijah Mitchell last year. There's question marks even with Bijan Robinson to some degree, with the way that they might want to sprinkle in Tyler Algier, or how much he's going to be utilized as a receiver, all that kind of stuff. And so I have Pollard at RB4 right now, behind those three that I just mentioned. And given the fact that he goes where he goes, I'm totally with you. He's a very, very easy draft pick to make in the second round this season. I agree that you could easily make the argument that he should be a late first, just given the environment. The last guy I want to talk about, Christian Watson. You and I talk about this a lot. So for those of you who don't know, Rich and I are friends, IRL. We talk about fantasy football probably every single day of our life. We go back and forth, just kind of talking about stuff. He's sort of my soundboard, if you will, which is why we definitely have agreement. We have plenty of disagreement too. But one of the things that we talk about a lot is we don't want to miss on players that can burn us, right? There's a lot of players out there who, you skip over, especially in like the running back dead zone. You ask yourself, is this guy really going to burn me if I don't take him? One player who I don't want to skip this year, partially because I think he could burn me, is Christian Watson. I think there's a chance that Watson could really, really crush the people who are outright fading him this season. Look, there's plenty of question marks to his profile. I thought there were plenty of question marks to his profile entering the NFL, where his production wasn't great. He wasn't an early declare, smaller school guy. There was just a lot of, it was basically drafted where he got drafted off of athleticism. And we've seen this archetype and this kind of player after a good rookie season fizzle out. Chase Claypool is the perfect example of that happening, right? So there's absolutely a bear case with Christian Watson, but there's also an insane bull case with him. And he was better than what Chase Claypool was when Chase Claypool was a rookie. Since 2011, only 7 rookie wide receivers have hit a 2.25 yards per route run rate. We know yards per route run is very predictive for future success at the wide receiver position. The 6 other wide receivers to hit that 2.25 mark: OBJ, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, AJ Brown, Tyreek Hill, and Chris Olave, who obviously we don't have his next season data, but of the other players, so of the other 5 players with next season data, every single one of them hit 15.9 PPR points per game during that second season. You can even extend that sample to rookie wideouts who hit 2 in the yards per route run department. You get similar results. Doing that expands our group from 7 wide receivers to 21 wide receivers. And of those 21, we have 17 who played 8 or more games during year 2. Those players exceeded ADP expectation on average by over 1.5 PPR points per game, and only 29% of them failed to give you a mid-range wide receiver 2 season. So you're looking at a scenario where, based on history, based on how Christian Watson performed, in year 1, things look very, very favorable for him, just given those types of comps. I think that if he were not playing with Jordan Love, if Aaron Rodgers were still quarterbacking the Green Bay Packers, I mean, Christian Watson would probably be a 2-3 turn guy at this point. He'd probably be drafted around where Chris Olave gets drafted, I would assume. And so you're really, you're drafting him in an area where we know running backs don't hit at a really great rate. I'm bullish on Watson. And like I said, he's one of those guys that could burn you if you end up fading him this year.
Yeah, and I like just the phrasing of that. And, I see he's a guy you see get comped, like people want to draw the corollary, like he's this year's Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis never earned routes in his career on a level like Christian Watson has, and he never was as good against man coverage as a rookie. They were talking a rookie that came out of, a small school And so I don't see how you can draw that, like maybe because they're just get big plays, but it's not even close in terms of what measured talent and earning targets has been. And I just like how you phrased as like burning you, because you look at the wide receivers in the ADP range. Like I think there's a number of guys you can say like, yeah, this guy could be a successful draft pick there, but like I'm not scared of getting bodied by those guys. Like I look at DeAndre Hopkins going to the Titans, right? Yeah, right. I can see him being like successful value play, but like am I going to get dragged to the shadow realm by DeAndre Hopkins? Probably not. Even Terry McLaurin, right? Drake London, like guys like that, like Jerry Jeudy, like those are all guys that go around the orbit of Christian Watson. And I'm not saying negative things about those picks. I think they can be successful draft picks, but are they going to just take me into the earth on a given week on one play, right? Like, and that's kind of what Christian Watson has. And then the Packers, I think, are undervalued anyways, because of it's like the Buccaneers situation, right? Like people are worried about like, what are the Buccaneers going to do going from Tom Brady to the group of jamokes they have this year? But Aaron Rodgers was really bad last year. So if that's the baseline, like what if there's actually a chance that 2023 Jordan Love can play on par with 2022 Aaron Rodgers, or if not better? And the Packers have our number one easiest passing schedule at Sharp Football Analysis. So that's another like reason to like kind of take another swing too, for the upside. So, I mean, I just like the way you phrased it. And I like the more I take Watson more, because typically by the point Watson come up in drafts, he's my wide receiver 3. Mm-hmm. And like, I feel really good when you have a hammer like that at wide receiver 3, it feels really good. I can see maybe some people saying like, I feel uneasy if he is my wide receiver 2, although I would be fine if he was my wide receiver 2. But when especially in these builds where you open wide receiver that are really good wide receivers, and you tack on a guy like that where you're just like, man, who cares about the volatility? There's gonna be weeks where my wide receivers get me 100 points.
Right.
Like, good luck.
Yeah, exactly. And there's room for growth still with Christian Watson. Like we look at last season, and he was so efficient and so unbelievably good per route. But he was still seeing like a 20-ish% target share in that offense. Like, could we not see a scenario where it's up to 25% this year? Like, I think that's very, very, very possible, all while seeing maybe a decrease in efficiency, because what he did last year was just so incredible. So even if he sees that decrease in efficiency, he can still be a better fantasy asset, because that volume is just going to be there more frequently for him. But anyway, Rich, thanks as always for hopping on and chatting. I think a lot of people will take at least something away from today's show. If you're not following Rich and his work, make sure you are on Twitter, on X, whatever, at Lord Reeves. You can do the same for me, at Late Round QB. Thanks for listening, everyone. Talk to you later in the week.